Hey, hello, Brent. 2018 here in Central Virginia. It's a rainy, cold April. So here we are in the kitchen workshop, and we're going to talk a little bit about braided fishing line today. I have a lot of folks I've fished with over the years who have different issues with braided line, and I just tried to make a little compilation, a little checklist from A to Z about things to do, things to not do that may help you get better use out of your braid, because it's really a wonderful product. Now we're going to be focusing today on the spinning reel aspects of braid. So if you already use it for your casting stuff, as long as you're dogging it down real tight when you're spooling it, you're probably good to go. I like it more for a spinning application, but that's just me. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So the first thing that you're going to want to be aware of is when you're spooling braid, is to make sure that your reel is braid ready. If you're going to tie right to that arbor, you need to make sure it's got some type of rubber, something there that's going to allow that braid to bite. Because if not, you're going to need to put a shot of mono on there to give it a bite. If you tie braid straight to especially just a smooth arbor, it's going to spin. You'll be able to take the line and hold it in your hand and hold the reel and just pull. And the whole spool of line, not the spool itself, but the spool of line will actually turn around the spool itself without the spool itself moving. So that's something to look out for. That's not a drag problem or anything else. That's a problem with how it was actually installed on the reel. Now, there's a couple of different ways to buy it. You can buy it in bulk, 100-yard spools, 125-yard spools, some of your fire lines and that, 150-yard spools, 300-yard spools. So if you're going to use 100 or 150, I would look at the manufacturer specs on that reel, see how much it'll hold, and that'll tell you how big a shot of mono that you need to put on that reel. I've re-spooled reels, up to 3 times because I want it to be just right. I want it to be filled to the edge where the bevel starts. I don't want it to be overfilled. I don't want it to be underfilled. So I have to work pretty hard sometimes to get that just right. Because I think it comes off the reel better when it's toward the edge. Too much creates wind knots. You're going to get slack. You're going to have problems. Too little, it's just you have too long a gap for the line to clear the lip of the spool. You want to match your braid to the application you're fishing. So if you're just because braided line is so thin, you don't want to go way up in your pound test for no reason, just because it's thinner. And I've gone down to as little as 5 pound tests for some ultralight applications. Now the issues I had with that was the issues I had with the ultralight, once it starts to wear a little bit, that 5 pound test to me just got a little fragile. 8 pound for ultralight applications is really where I like to be. I feel like it's supple yet strong, even when it gets a little wear on it. You do want to keep an eye on that last 6 inches or so after, especially if you use a really long leader, and let's say you've been using the same bait for the last couple trips. If you're lucky enough to do that, that last little bit of line can get actually pretty worn. So every now and then, even though it's not where your actual lure is attached to, every now and then you may want to snip that just to get keep that where that junction is fresh and tight. A knot. You're going to want to learn a good knot. Now, the best knot for splicing braid to monofilament or fluorocarbon is going to be the FG knot. Downfall of that knot is it's not that easy to tie. If you're going to use it, say casting for cobia or muskie, or you're fishing a bass tournament, something where getting a bite can be a really big deal, I would be darn sure that you've practiced that knot, that you've used it in other applications, and that you're comfortable that knot's going to hold. Because if it's not tied right, it's going to slip. And most of the ones that I've tied, when I finally say, okay, this thing is bit, it holds. But I have had some that once you get to pulling on it good, it slips. I don't know why it does that. I haven't perfected that knot yet. That's why I don't use it as much. I've used a lot of Albright, some variation, Crazy Alberto, improved Albright. When you double your leader, run your braid through, wrap it, and sometimes you double it, wrap it back, do the hole, tighten it up. Works pretty good. sometimes you'll have issues, especially with any of these knots, where you're using like a slick braid, like a Suffix 832, or or the Power Pro Super Slick, and a fluorocarbon leader. You just got a slick braid and a really hard leader, and if you don't get enough wraps, you don't get that thing just right, you're setting yourself up to have a failure of your line system. The one that I use most often now, I think it's the simplest. Works for me. I've had it break, but I've never had it slip. And by break, I mean when I would guess the bass is probably 8 to 10 pounds. You know, I'm fishing. He bites right next to the boat, and I reared up, and he rolled over, and I was like, "Whoa!" And he just broke. You know, that could have just been because I had to drag down too tight. Anyway, it doesn't slip. It's the uni to uni. I run a bunch of wraps on my braided side, probably up to 9 or 10, sometimes more. It just seems to make for a better, sleeker taper. I'll tie typically the mono or fluorocarbon knot first, usually 4 to 5 wraps, no more. Otherwise, it just gets too bulky. I'll tighten that one down as much as I can and still get the braid to pull through. You know, because you're creating 2 knots, and when you tighten them up, they're jamming together. And that just makes for a sleeker presentation. You really want to tighten that mono, that fluorocarbon down well, so it goes through your guides. If not, it's just gonna sound like you got rocks trying to go through your guides. When you're spooling up your line, we'll talk a little bit about line lay. I like for it to be just right. If it's stacking up at the top, at least for the Shimanos, you got these little spacers that come with your reels. You can put those, you just take your spool off, pop 1 or 2 of these on, depending on how bad it is, and go from there. It's going to make it better if it's at the top. If it's at the bottom, you may take the original one out. Those are typically a little thicker, and replace it with one of those. Because if that's the case, you need to get that spool down farther on the reel. But I like having it nice and level. All right, now we're getting to the actual fishing part. Now, when you're fishing with braid, now this is monofilament. This is a little ultralight, but I can get it in the film easy. And you grab a hold of this line and you make your cast. You're gonna flip the bail by hand. You're not gonna depend on the ramp that's on the main body of your reel for your rotor to hit that ramp and rotate and trip the bail. 1, it's not good for your pinion gear. 2, it's gonna create slack in your line. So you got that going for you. Other thing that I do is I hold my finger out. Even on a day that's not windy, you're going to get a certain amount of slack in your line, and that's where those wind knots are going to come from. So just by holding your finger out, and it's no magic. I mean, but until that I pick up and get the slack out of the line, I'll just hold my finger on that. It keeps just enough tension on there to keep that line not tight on the spool, but certainly more snug than it would be if you just reeled up the slack. And that's where those wind knots are going to come from, and those are a pain to do. Talked about checking your leader. So we've selected our spool. We've spooled it on. I don't think I mentioned this, but you want to spool it on tight. When you're spooling your braid on, you want to dog that drag down. You want to get you a cotton glove, cotton rag, something. And you want to pinch, you white knuckle to get that braid on there good and tight, because if not, it'll dig into itself, and that creates a myriad of headaches. It's not going to cast well. Digs into itself. If you catch a big fish, especially right after your bait hits the water and that fish starts to make some runs, and that line is dug in there. And especially if your drag is tight now, you got to be digging in far. It's not good. So spool it on tight. You won't have that issue. Keep your line lay right. Flip your bail by hand. Flip your bail by hand. Flip your bail by hand, and you'll be a whole lot better off. Now, I'll try to keep this brief. But that main gear that turns, that when you let the rotor hit the ramp to flip your bail, it's hitting in different spots on that main gear all around, but it's hitting the same spot on that pinion gear, and that pinion gear is brass, and eventually you're gonna cause you're going to cause some damage over time, and it's unnecessary. So flip the bail by hand. Last thing we're going to talk about is, and this is as much, I guess, true with monofilament as braid. In regards to checking your guides, if you're having some fish break off, you need to run some pantyhose. I know you got some in your drawer. Run the pantyhose through your guides and just kind of seesaw it back and forth real gently. And that is pretty sensitive. You can also take a Q-tip, cotton ball, whatever, something sensitive that's going to get in there. And if you've got a nick or a crack in your ceramic, that's going to help you find it. Now, where we're going with this is that when you're done fishing, braided line holds a small amount of water. It's, monofilament's a pretty solid thing. It's not very porous. Braided line is a woven, so it's going to hold a certain amount of water. So as the line is coming through the guides, you got a certain amount of water that's just, especially in salt water. Not as much true in fresh water as far as the hazards, but salt water in particular. You're going to want to wash it. You're going to want to make sure that your guides are clean when you're done. Now, I even take mine after I wash mine. You're going to think I'm silly. I'll taste them. You can taste that salt pretty easy. I can tell you, there may still be some salt in there, but if it's like, ooh, I didn't taste like I washed that one off. So keep those guides clean. Your rods are going to last you longer. That's just something that one of the disadvantages of braids, it does hold some water. Now, where it really comes into play even more so is this is your line roller. Most reels are going to have some type of bearing in there, even your lower end reels. Some dials actually have a bushing in there, which is, bushings are not as smooth, but the thing about the bushing is it's not gonna lock up. Typically, they're can be more dependable. They're just not as smooth. So if you're using braid, you want to probably once a year or so take that line roller out. Pay attention to how it comes off, so you can put it back on. Scale of 1 to 10, it's probably a 2 or 3 on level of difficulty. As long as you take it off and just put everything out and put it back the same way, it's going to be just fine. But take and just clean it out, little Q-tip, you don't want to use WD-40 or anything like that unless you got some rust, and if you do, you got other issues. But some type of light machine oil just to keep that bearing, just get that salt off that bearing. And as long as you're doing it every year, you're probably going to get pretty good use out of it. Unless you're a guide or something like that, you just do a ton of fishing, then you want to do it more often. But if you ever get to where you feel really gritty, but only when you're retrieving, only when you got line actually coming in, that's probably going to be your problem. And lastly, when you're done fishing, that salt that sits in there over time can definitely cause some corrosion issues with your spool. So when I'm done, sometimes I'll hook it to something in the yard or a limb or something, and I'll just walk back about a cast, and you don't have to go far, because a lot of times, even when you're casting, that last bit of line isn't actually getting wet, other than what it's coming in contact with that is getting wet. But I'll run that a cast or so back, take a wet cloth, and just walk my way back to it, and that's it. That gets some of the salt off of there, keeps the line tight on the spool, and keeps you ready to go for next time. Well, look, we've already gone almost, we're getting close to 15 minutes on this braid thing. I'd be glad if you want to talk about Jesus, you want to talk about fishing, I'm good. We can go there. So just light me up with a comment. If you think we went too long, hey, sorry. Here's what it is. That's everything I had to say about braided fishing line. If you have any questions, let me know. I'd be glad to talk to you. Otherwise, there's a lot of other information out there. There's a lot of other people with a lot of opinions. So anyway, thank you very much. If you listened this long, God bless you. Have a good day. I'm Brent.